The hashtag detonated before dawn, and Ethan's phone became a siren. He stared at his name in screaming caps, while rain drummed the window. Ethan said, "Tell me this is a prank." The feed replied with knives and certainty. "I'll." Maya said, "I'm here, call me now." Clara said, "We need to talk optics before noon." Headlines braided rumor into verdicts, and sponsors vanished like lights cut on a stage. Ethan said, "Noah, pick up please." The call rang into a machine that sounded like a stranger's hallway. He scrolled the thread where jokes replaced facts and friends replaced themselves with distance. Ethan said, "I'll explain it all," to a screen that refused to listen. The apartment felt smaller with every ping, like the walls were moving in. He whispered to the quiet, hoping it might answer before the world finished deciding. The morning commute carried Ethan's face on every screen, and the station swallowed his name like an ad. Maya said, "Do not read the comments today. I'm trying to. One to you all, homeless today." He nodded, but the headlines were louder than advice. A stranger laughed at a meme 2 steps away, and it landed like a punch. Ethan said, "They don't even know me." The turnstiles clicked with the finality of doors that don't reopen. Posters borrowed his smile for a scandal he didn't recognize. Maya said, "We'll craft a statement, but not while you're bleeding." He watched a clip loop where context used to live. Somewhere his inbox turned into a courtroom, and the jurors followed him underground. He gripped the rail, counting breaths as the train pulled a tunnel over the light. The group chat turned into a museum of read receipts, and the silence had labels. Ethan said, "Just say something, anything." The bubbles rose and died like shy fish. The cafe steamed and hummed, but their table was suddenly reservation only for ghosts. A barista glanced at the screen, then at him, then away, as if caught stealing a look. Ethan said, "Noah would never leave me hanging." Chairs scraped like subtle judgments across tile. He typed a paragraph and watched it shrink into a single apologetic sentence. Maya said, "If they vanished, they were already halfway gone." The espresso machine hissed like a crowd booing from the wings. He swallowed the bitter and wished it were enough to wake the truth. Outside the building, a knot of cameras breathed as one creature, and Ethan stepped into its teeth. Ethan said, "Please let me speak." A dozen lenses answered with appetite. A voice asked a question shaped like a verdict, and another stacked it higher. Maya said, "Back inside now." He raised his hands, palms open, as if that could show everything he carried. A car horn cut through, and the crowd surged to follow the noise. Ethan said, "I won't run." The sidewalk vibrated with live streams and opinions balanced on gimbals. Someone shouted a joke that stuck to him like wet paper. He tasted metal in his mouth, and understood that sound could bruise. The hallway outside Noah's door smelled like cold paint and old promises. Ethan said, "I'm here, just talk to me." The peephole stared back like an indifferent pupil. He listened to the apartment breathe, hunting for a footstep that might forgive. A neighbor passed with headphones, carrying a private weather. Ethan said, "You know me better than anyone." A message popped up that he didn't open because he wanted a voice. The air handled his words and put them down gently, as if fragile. He knocked again, softer, and time took the shape of the pause. Maya said, "We can leave whenever you're ready." He waited for the click that could rewrite the morning, and got the quiet that writes endings instead. Ethan sat at his desk staring at a framed certificate that once meant stability. The glass shimmered with the reflection of a man he no longer recognized. Ethan said, "I built this life with sweat, not shortcuts." The words cracked as if the walls themselves doubted him. His parents' voices echoed in memory, praising the child who never gave up. He pressed a hand to his temple, chasing the sound of who he used to be. Ethan said, "Was I naive to think integrity could shield me?" A gust rattled the window, as though the world outside mocked him. He closed his eyes and pictured the first stage he ever stood on, applause like sunlight filling the room. The memory felt stolen, not his. Ethan said. I was someone once, wasn't I? Silence returned, heavy and absolute, leaving him trapped between his past and the storm swallowing his present. The dinner table sagged under untouched food. Ethan's father cut meat into silent bites while his mother shifted her fork without lifting it. Ethan said, I know what you've read. His father glanced up, eyes heavy with fear disguised as restraint. His mother whispered, We can't fight the world for you. The words carved deeper than headlines. Ethan said, You always told me to stand tall. His sister cleared her throat but stayed quiet, pushing peas into straight lines. The room ticked with the wall clock louder than breathing. Ethan said, I'm still the son you raised. His mother's hand twitched, wanting to reach, but froze halfway, fear pinning her. A candle flickered, the flame shrinking low, and the air thickened until even comfort tasted like ash. Ethan sat in a lawyer's office lined with shelves of books like watchful eyes. Clara paced, her heels marking time like a drumbeat. Clara said, You need to stay quiet until we regroup. Ethan said, Quiet is what killed me already. She pressed her lips thin, scanning her tablet as if answers could be coded in contracts. Ethan's hands twisted into knots, palms slick. Clara said, Your name is a brand, and right now that brand is poison. The word clanged like a gavel. Ethan said, I'm more than a brand. Her silence gave him the verdict he dreaded. A rain streak ran down the window, warping the city skyline into something unrecognizable, much like his life. The phone buzzed with voicemails he couldn't face. Ethan sat on the couch, scrolling through articles that stripped him into headlines. Ethan said, I never thought words could be so sharp. Each swipe bled another accusation. A clip replayed, looping without mercy. Maya walked in, setting down tea that steamed like fragile hope. Maya said, You're bleeding yourself by reading. He looked at her, eyes raw, but didn't stop. Ethan said, If I don't see it, then I'm blind to what they've made me. She grabbed the phone, her hand trembling as much as his. Maya said, Seeing isn't healing. The air trembled with her quiet defiance. He turned away, afraid of his reflection in her eyes. Ethan lingered in the small park where he once rehearsed speeches as a teenager, the stage long gone, but the echo alive in memory. He touched the rusting bench, hearing applause only he could recall. Ethan said, Back then, it felt like I mattered. A child's laughter cut through the air, untethered and pure. He closed his eyes, inhaling grass damp with dew, trying to anchor himself to innocence. Maya sat beside him, quiet, letting silence say what words could not. Ethan said, If I vanish tomorrow, at least this place will remember me. She whispered, I will remember too. The sun folded itself under clouds, and the moment slipped fragile into night, carrying both grief and the faintest seed of strength. Ethan sat in the boardroom where his name once drew applause, but now the screen showed a termination notice. Clara said, They've cut ties effective immediately. His chest hollowed as if someone scooped the air out. Ethan said, I gave them years. Clara didn't blink, her gaze already sliding to the next crisis on her tablet. He felt the floor tilt, every memory of effort tipping into ash. Ethan said, I thought loyalty meant something. The silence of the executives watching through glass shredded him more than words. A clock ticked with deliberate cruelty, marking an end that came without warning. Ethan said, What do I tell them, my family, my friends? The screen glowed back with nothing but finality. His hands trembled as he pressed them flat against the table, searching for ground that wasn't disappearing beneath him. Ethan left the office, but outside in the lobby, he saw Daniel shaking hands with a partner who once called Ethan a brother. Daniel said, Opportunities open when others fall. The words cut like they were rehearsed. Ethan said, You wanted this, didn't you? Daniel smiled without guilt, brushing his sleeve as if dusted by Ethan's ruin. Clara tugged at Ethan's arm, urging him not to react, but rage boiled under his skin. Ethan said, You climbed over me. The crowd of staffers averted their eyes, pretending to study screens or papers. The betrayal felt too clean, too polished, like it had been waiting for the right moment. Daniel said, "This is just business." Ethan turned away, because shouting in that marble lobby would only feed the story they wanted to write about him. Ethan scrolled late at night, eyes red as he read the digital avalanche. Old posts were dragged from archives, twisted and stripped of context. Ethan said, "I was a different man then." Maya sat beside him, her laptop closed, her hand hovering near his shoulder. Maya said, "They don't care about growth. They care about fire." Each line on the screen screamed accusation. Ethan's fingers hovered above the keyboard, tempted to defend, terrified to add fuel. Ethan said, "If I stay silent, I'm guilty. If I speak, I'm guilty louder." The glow of the screen hollowed his face, painting him in the colors of judgment. Maya pressed her palm over his hand, until it stilled. The silence between them hummed with the weight of everything unsaid. Ethan stood at the doorway of his parents' home, suitcase in hand, hoping for refuge. But his sister Ava met him first, arms crossed like a guard. Ava said, "The neighbors are talking. Mom can't even shop without whispers." Ethan said, "I didn't ask for this storm." Her eyes softened, but her lips stayed pressed into a line. Ethan said, "I need you to believe me." Ava shook her head slowly, guilt flickering before vanishing. Ava said, "Sometimes silence is safer than defense." Her words landed like Noah's did, sharp absence disguised as survival. Ethan stepped past her, the house familiar but colder, walls echoing with judgment unspoken. He felt like a stranger inside his own bloodline. Outside a downtown bar, laughter burst from a group showing each other memes of Ethan's face, edited into jokes. He stopped, stomach tight. Ethan said, "That's me." The crowd didn't notice him standing only steps away. "Aw." A younger man's phone screen glared with a cartoon caricature, mocking Ethan's fall. Maya said, "Don't look." He couldn't pull his eyes away. Ethan said, "I'm the punchline." The group roared again, their joy sharper than knives. His hand curled into a fist, then fell open, limp with exhaustion. He turned away before they could see him, because he couldn't stand to watch strangers carry pieces of him like cheap entertainment. Ethan typed a long defense, every word sharpened with anger, but before posting he paused. His finger hovered above the screen, as if balanced on a blade. Ethan said, "If I speak, I burn. If I stay quiet, I vanish." Maya sat across the table, her eyes wet, whispering, "Don't give them more fire." He hit delete, watching paragraphs collapse into emptiness. Ethan said, "They've stolen my voice." The cursor blinked like mockery, daring him to try again. He closed the laptop hard, the sound echoing louder than it should. His chest tightened, as though silence itself was strangling him. Ethan stepped outside into a street, alive with flashing signs and whispers. He heard his name woven into strangers' laughter. Ethan said, "Do you see how they feed on this?" Maya tucked her scarf tighter, whispering, "Ignore them." But every laugh cracked against his ribs. A phone lifted, a lens catching his face. Ethan said, "I'm not prey." Yet his feet froze, caught in a spotlight he couldn't see but felt. The city swallowed his defiance with neon teeth, and he shrank back into shadow. Daniel leaned back in the conference chair, his smile sharp as he signed a new deal. Ethan, watching from the doorway, felt the stab of betrayal like steel. Daniel said, "Timing is everything." The contract slid across the table, and the applause that followed was salt poured into Ethan's wounds. Ethan said, "You orchestrated this." Daniel smirked, sipping water with calm detachment. Clara tugged Ethan back, whispering, "Don't give him the spectacle he wants." Ethan's fists trembled, but his throat locked. Daniel said, "You handed me the ladder when you fell." Rage rose but had nowhere to go. Ethan left, the sound of clapping echoing like chains. Ethan stood outside Noah's home again, rain soaking through his jacket. Ethan said, "Say something, just once." The silence behind the door was louder than thunder. He leaned his forehead against the wood, eyes burning. Ethan said, "Your silence is my death sentence." Inside he imagined Noah listening, refusing, and that cut deeper than lies. Maya said softly, "He chose fear over friendship." The words folded him smaller, like paper crushed in a fist. Ethan knocked once more, knowing the answer had already been given. Alone in his apartment, Ethan stared at the mirror. His reflection looked like a stranger wearing his skin. Ethan said, "I don't know who I am anymore." The mirror gave back nothing but hollow eyes. His chest heaved with a sound that wasn't quite sobbing, not quite rage. He smashed his fist on the sink, the thud sharp in the quiet. Ethan said, "They've taken everything but this face." He leaned forward, trembling, as if daring the reflection to answer. The silence mocked him again, and he shut his eyes, because seeing himself hurt more than hearing the world. Ethan sat across from Julian, a quiet former coworker who had avoided the noise for months. Julian's eyes burned with withheld truth. Julian said, "It wasn't random, Ethan. Someone fed them the first spark." Ethan leaned forward, voice rough. "Who?" Julian hesitated, lips trembling. He said, "Daniel leaked the documents. He needed you gone." Ethan's stomach turned, the betrayal finally named. Maya whispered, "I told you the knife wasn't the mob's alone." Ethan clenched his fists, rage and grief colliding in his chest. The silence afterward felt like a confession heavier than chains. "No." Ethan replayed Julian's words on the walk home, every syllable striking like glass. Ethan said, "Daniel lit the fire, and Noah let it burn." Maya said softly, "Two betrayals, one silence." His voice cracked. "They were my brothers." The city around them buzzed with laughter from bars, but Ethan only heard echoes of loyalty turned to poison. He stopped under a streetlight, chest heaving. Ethan said, "I was executed by those closest." Maya reached for his hand, but he pulled back, unable to touch comfort when truth still burned. The night air carried no mercy, only the stench of betrayal. Ethan confronted Daniel in his office, where glass walls made cruelty transparent. Ethan said, "You leaked it." Daniel smirked, replying, "I used what you left unguarded." Ethan's fists shook, but he held his ground. Daniel said, "I didn't ruin you. I revealed you." Ethan shouted, "You built your empire on my ashes." Daniel leaned back in his chair, unfazed, his smirk growing. Ethan's voice dropped to a whisper, "You were never my friend." Daniel said coldly, "Friendship doesn't pay." The air between them split like lightning, raw and irreversible. Ethan sat in his apartment, trembling as he read an article that twisted the betrayal into another attack. Ethan said, "Even the truth is poisoned before it breathes." Maya placed a hand on his shoulder. She said, "Truth only matters when people want it." He turned to her, eyes hollow. Ethan said, "Do they want me destroyed that badly?" She whispered, "Daniel wanted you erased, Noah wanted you silent, and the mob wanted a show." The walls closed tighter as he realized he had been cornered from every side. Ethan stood before Noah's door for the final time, his voice breaking. Ethan said, "You let me bleed when a word could have saved me." Silence pressed back, heavier than bricks. Ethan whispered, "Your silence was the knife." He waited for footsteps, for a latch, for mercy, but the door stayed closed. Maya tugged his arm gently, urging him to leave, but Ethan lingered a moment longer. His chest rose with a final shaky breath. "Oh." Ethan said, "I buried myself believing in you." He turned, walking away, each step heavier than the last, carrying the truth like a scar carved deep. Ethan stormed into the crowded hall where Daniel basked in applause from a new contract signing. Ethan shouted, "You built this empire on betrayal." The crowd gasped, cameras rising like weapons. Daniel smirked, still chasing shadows. "Ow." Ethan's fists clenched, his voice shaking but fierce. Ethan said, "I gave everything, and you sold me for scraps of power." Daniel leaned in, whispering with venom. You made it easy. The room erupted with murmurs, the truth twisting into spectacle. Ethan stood trembling, rage burning, but his voice louder than fear. Ethan confronted Daniel in front of the crowd, his voice breaking as he shouted, You ruined me, and Noah let you. The silence was a knife before laughter rippled through the room. Daniel said, No one believes the fallen. Ethan's eyes scanned the audience, desperate for one defender, but saw only curiosity. His chest heaved, voice raw. Does truth mean nothing anymore? A flashbulb blinded him, capturing his collapse as entertainment. Daniel shrugged, feigning innocence, while the applause returned. Ethan felt his heart fracture beneath the sound. Ethan staggered outside, where the media waited like vultures. A reporter shoved a mic at him asking, Do you admit guilt? Ethan shouted, I admit betrayal, but not mine. Cameras flashed, questions piling like stones. His voice cracked, I was executed without a trial. Maya rushed to his side, grabbing his arm. Maya said, Stop before they twist more. But Ethan stood firm, eyes wild, words spilling raw. Ethan said, The truth is ugly, but it's theirs, not mine. The mob devoured every syllable, hungry for collapse. Back in his apartment, Ethan collapsed to the floor, gasping as though drowning in air. Ethan said, I can't breathe under this weight. Maya knelt beside him, her voice trembling. You're stronger than their lies. He shook his head, fists pressed to his chest. Ethan said, They've buried me alive. Tears cut tracks down his cheeks, his whole body trembling. Maya cupped his face, whispering, You're still here. That matters. He clutched her hand, as if it was the last anchor keeping him from slipping entirely into darkness. Ethan walked to the balcony, night air sharp with city noise. He gripped the railing, whispering, This ends tonight. Maya begged, Don't let them win by breaking you. His knuckles whitened as he held the rail, trembling. Ethan said, They've already broken me. He raised his head toward the sky, breath ragged, as if daring the stars to judge him too. Maya wrapped her arms around his waist from behind, pleading, Don't disappear on me. His shoulders shook, caught between collapse and defiance. Ethan whispered, Then help me stand. The morning broke slow, pale light crawling across Ethan's desk, painting the notebook where he sat, scratching lines that shook between confession and resolve. His pen carved truths he had never said aloud. Ethan said, I gave them pieces of myself they never deserved. Each word hit like a hammer, forging something raw into shape. Maya leaned against the counter, watching him with eyes that held both fatigue and faith. Maya said, Write it clean, Ethan. Not for them, but for you. He nodded, throat tight, and crossed out a sentence bloated with apology. He whispered, No more begging. The kettle hissed in the background like an old enemy softened by time. He straightened his shoulders and looked at the blank page ahead. Ethan said, If my voice is all that's left, then it will not be theirs to twist again. The page waited, wide as a doorway. The small studio smelled of dust and old wires, its single camera blinking like an unblinking witness. Maya adjusted the mic, her fingers trembling once before she stilled them. Ethan said, Don't act, just breathe. She nodded and opened her notes, a timeline carved in plain words. Maya said, This is what happened, names, dates, motives. Her voice did not crack, it cut steady through the room. Ethan stood behind the light, his face in shadow, watching her spine straighten with every sentence. She spoke of silence that shielded betrayal and lies dressed as outrage. She said, The mob shouted, but silence carved deeper. Ethan felt his throat tighten, his hands shaking with recognition. When she finished, the air seemed larger, as if walls had widened. He whispered, You gave the truth a body again. She pressed save with a final click, sealing words into something unerasable. That night, Noah's name appeared on Ethan's screen, a ghost resurfacing after silence. The message was short, cowardly. Noah wrote, "They threatened everything I had. I couldn't risk it." Ethan stared until the words blurred, his chest tightening with old hope now dead. Ethan whispered, "You chose safety. And you killed me with it." He typed 3 different replies, each heavier than the last, and erased them all. Maya watched, shaking her head softly. Maya said, "You don't owe him your pain twice." Ethan let the phone slip to the table, the screen dimming into black glass. He sat back, staring at the ceiling, listening to the hum of pipes, instead of the silence behind Noah's door. Outside, a neighbor laughed, carefree. But this time the sound floated past him without cutting. For the first time in months, noise did not pierce. He exhaled, chest loosening. Days later, Ethan stood in the park where years ago his first applause had wrapped him like fire. The bench was rusting, grass uneven, but the air still held echoes of clapping hands. A circle of teenagers sat before him, restless but curious. Ethan said, "They will try to name you, but you get to answer with your own voice." His words felt heavier than speeches he once rehearsed here. A boy raised his hand, asking, "Does truth ever win?" Ethan smiled faintly, sad and honest. Ethan said, "Not always in the crowd's eyes, but it wins you back when you refuse to lie about yourself." Maya sat on the bench nearby, watching, her scarf trailing in the wind, her gaze filled with quiet pride. Ethan opened his hands as if releasing weight into the sky. The teens listened, still as trees in evening wind. That night the apartment was quiet, except for the hum of the fridge and Ethan's typing. He wrote a statement not of apology but of truth, stripped of polish, free of theater. Ethan said, "I was betrayed, I was abandoned, but I will not be erased." His fingers did not tremble as they once had. Maya leaned in the doorway, whispering, "Send it, then rest." He pressed post, and for the first time felt the ground beneath him steady. Ethan poured a glass of water, half full, setting it on the counter as if to prove balance. He stepped onto the balcony, the city pulsing below without judgment. Ethan whispered into the night, "Your silence was the knife, but I learned to stop the bleeding." The words drifted upward, swallowed by stars, leaving him lighter. Maya joined him, resting her hand in his, both standing against a skyline that finally seemed theirs.